WMC discusses topical issues that affect you. Today, we will be kicking off the 2025 legislative session with Stephanie Mason, Public Information Officer and Legislative Liaison, and Micah Matthews, Deputy Executive and Legislative Director for the Washington Medical Commission. Before I turn the webinar over, I would like to take care of a few housekeeping items. Feel free to turn on your camera if you're comfortable, but remember to stay muted unless I call on you and to answer a question. Stephanie will be giving you a rundown of the bills in process to keep an eye on this legislative session, but Coffee with the Commission is first a conversation. So we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation by using the chat box within the Teams framework. If you have any technical issues, feel free to use that chat box to get my attention, and I'll do my best to walk you through whatever's causing the issue. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available on our website within the next few days, so please feel free to share these resources with your friends and colleagues. So with that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you will have some patience with me as I get through my slides. I do this about once a year, so it's all foreign until I do it again. So as Jimmy said, I'm Stephanie Mason. I'm the Legislative Liaison and Public Information Officer for the Medical Commission. We kind of like to start off these legislative meetings with an overview of who we are and also some high-level insight of how the legislature operates. I know it might be a little redundant for some of us, but it's helpful for others. As she said, as a housekeeping note, I'll be available for questions at the end, and Micah is joining us from the Capitol, so he will also be available for your questions via phone. The Medical Commission is the state regulator, if you didn't know, for medical doctors and physician assistants. We currently regulate about 34,000 licensees. The WMC establishes, monitors, and enforces qualifications for licensure and consistent standards of practice. So our duty is to promote the delivery of quality healthcare to the people in Washington. While the WMC does not lobby, during session we do track, monitor, and analyze bills. We're a partially independent agency, and we work collaboratively with the Department of Health. So we testify on bills, meet with legislators, and help educate stakeholders and the public on legislation, whether it's beneficial or detrimental to the practice of medicine. Most of us have seen how a bill becomes law, the PBS video. It's still available out there if anybody's interested. Additionally, this year, the Washington legislature has revamped their website to the frustration of some of us who are pretty comfortable with the old site, but they have provided several educational videos there, and they're in 2 languages. You can visit that site at leg.wa.gov. That's leg.wa.gov. It has those videos and several other helpful things like committee schedules and bill details. Most of the bills that are impactful for the Medical Commission will go through House Healthcare. Oh, I'm sorry, I got an echo. I'll repeat that. Most of the bills that are impactful for the Medical Commission will go through House Healthcare and Wellness or Senate Health and Long-Term Care. Additionally, for the past couple of years, the Medical Commission has also been monitoring legislation in the House Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Committee as it addresses our state compacts. As most of you know, the legislature will convene for the 2025 regular session on January 13th, so that's just 5 days from now. Most of the dates listed here are pretty self-explanatory. Like I said earlier, though, if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them for you at the end. House of Origin is where a bill originates, either the House or the Senate, and in a specific committee, like I mentioned, House Health and Senate Health are where we spend most of our time. NTIB means necessary to implement the budget. These bills are given special consideration because they are deemed crucial for the timely passage of the budget. Bills that get that allocation are able to bypass normal deadlines, so we see some of those each session. And lastly, sine die, for those of you who are history nerds like me or are interested, is the last day, and sine die is a Latin term that means without a day, which indicates no day is set for the resumption or continuation of meetings. So cutoff dates are important for a host of reasons, mostly transparency and the reduction of bills. As you can see, we start off the session with a high number of bills and introduced bills, and due to cutoff, that amount gets funneled down to a few hundred as the session progresses. In the last biennium, there was about 3,500 and 486 passed. 2021 to 22, there were almost 3,000 bills, 2,835 introduced and 649 passed. And in 2019 to 2020, there were 4,640 bills introduced and 868 of those passed. So while it seems the introductions haven't mellowed and there's still thousands each time, the reduction in actual laws has passed year over year. As of this morning, however, there were 370 bills pre-filed, and the Medical Commission is tracking 14. So the types of bills that the WMC tracks. This is just an overview. Of course, we can look into ones that go outside this, but this is the majority. We may chime in on one of these topics, attend hearings, and testify, especially if it's legislation that directly affects our Practice Act. Directly requires the Medical Commission be responsible for enacting a part of this legislation, or if it could negatively impact the practice or the public. Most of these are self-explanatory, except for legislating the practice of medicine. We find that the legislature sometimes attempts to intervene in the practice of medicine, often by trying to mandate actions that should be left to the professional judgment of healthcare practitioners. And that last issue on here, the budget, will be especially impactful this year as the state has a huge budget shortfall that it's attempting to address. So last year, the WMC tracked 63 bills internally, and we tracked over 100 collaboratively with the Department of Health. Of those we tracked and participated in, a handful were highly impactful, which you can see listed here. I won't talk about all of them, but we are particularly proud of Senate Bill 5184, which created a new healthcare profession. The WMC will license and regulate anesthesiologist assistants. We believe it offers a solution for limited hospital capacity by adding healthcare professionals to the current strained workforce. And the passage of HB 1300, which you can see our great staff at the bill signing for this picture. That expands the list of unprofessional conduct under the Uniform Disciplinary Act, the UDA. Excuse me. It includes now the implantation of a licensee's reproductive material into a patient. So I'm sure you've all heard of the Netflix documentary, which talks about the fertility specialist in Indiana who inseminated dozens of patients and was never disciplined due to a gap in the law there. Nationally, this issue became much more prevalent as home DNA tests have become more commonplace. And with the passage of 1300, we now specifically have a part of the UDA that addresses that gap. The WMC took its action on its first complaint about this issue last year. This year, in 2025, the WMC has some legislative proposals of our own. Among them is a bill that would ensure the public has recourse for medical examiner determinations. Legally, there's a gap that has left the WMC without grounds to take action on MEs and coroners, but the law is unclear on who the public should turn to. Our proposal would put the responsibility with the court and allow more access for everyone. Another piece of legislation the WMC is looking to propose would make medical records and sensitive data regarding practitioners disclosable through the Public Records Act. So with the current political climate and a patchwork of differing state laws regarding aspects of healthcare, especially reproductive healthcare, there's been a rise in outside groups looking for practitioner data. The WMC would like to protect our state doctors and PAs by having that exempted from the Public Records Act. Currently, however, these bills, along with a few others, are on hold due to both the budget and changes in leadership, but they might still progress. That gets me to some of our changes in leadership that we're all kind of aware of. I don't know if you know, but we're getting a new president very soon. We have new leadership both at that federal level and at the state level. Based on the past sessions with the Trump administration and on pre-filed legislation this session, the WMC is prepared to see an uptick in the number of bills introduced that focus on reproductive and transgender health. The University of Washington study found that abortions provided to individuals who came to Washington from other states has increased 50% since the Dobbs decision. Just in 2023, Washington worked even harder to pass laws that shield clinicians who provide abortion care. And as you likely know, Bob Ferguson, who was elected governor, worked during his time as Attorney General to protect reproductive health care in Washington. So we expect that that will continue, and we will continue to have laws that protect reproductive and gender-affirming care in our state. However, we also have skilled clinician commissioners with experience in this area of medicine. We'll be looking at each piece of legislation with an eye on protecting the public, best practices, and continuing push not to legislate the practice of medicine. I went through all of that quickly, but like Jimmy said, this is a conversation, and I am here for your questions. Oh, Jimmy, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Thank you for presenting all of that information. I know it can be a little daunting. So that's why, like we're saying, Coffee with the Commission is a conversation. It was a lot of information. If you have a question about the legislative process, the WMC's role at the legislature, or just a general question about a bill, feel free to raise your hand. You can do that on the top bar. There's a little hand that says raise. So feel free to click on that and we can unmute you. Or you can type in any question you might have and I can read it on your behalf. So I can go ahead and give people a second to find those buttons or type in the question. Stephanie, what are you most looking forward to this legislative session?
I was just talking with Micah, and we're still hopeful that we'll be able to put through that ME bill or the practice exemption bill. Those are hard words to say. I think they would be really helpful for us and for the general public who, especially the ME bill, doesn't seem to have any recourse with the death determinations, and the Medical Commission has come across that type of complaint several times. So we'd like the public to be able to take action, and the Practice Exemption Act would really help us make sure that our doctors are protected. And I think if we could get both of those bills introduced, that would be a great win for us this session.
Micah, is there anything you're looking forward to this session?
Get my steps in and that sort of thing. No, just to clarify a little bit on what Stephanie was saying, the ME bill is the medical examiner's bill. So there's a quirk in the law that the laws that regulate physicians that we are required to carry out assume that the patient is alive, and so and that's in the way that they're phrased, and so it doesn't strictly apply well to the medical examiners, and so when we have to take some sort of regulatory action, that ambiguity leads to court losses, as it turns out to do. And so there's also a confusion among the public that they think that they can come to the Medical Commission to change cause or manner of death determinations in an autopsy or an ME setting, and that's just not the case. We don't have that authority. So the bill that Stephanie's talking about would shift that authority over to the court system, so the family members or members of the public could petition the court to reconsider the cause or manner of death determination done by an ME. Not so much a coroner, that already kind of exists there, but this is specifically for MEs, and stating that it's not the practice of medicine to be doing an autopsy. And that's, again, based on the plain language read of the Uniform Disciplinary Act and the Medical Practice Act. It just assumes that the patient that the doctor's interacting with is alive. So the other ones that I was looking forward to are there's a draft for a license relinquishment process that's non-disciplinary. So if someone decides that they want to leave the state and they don't want to have to renew anything, if they have a health concern, if they want to retire, they can simply choose to relinquish their license and relinquish the property right. There's also some interest in that from the Washington Physician Health Program, where they have folks that as they go through the process, it just turns out they're not going to be able to return to practicing medicine, and so there's that surety that they can turn their license in without any sort of a disciplinary function. Because currently, right now, the way the law reads, in order to take that license back, we have to take a small disciplinary action. It's considered disciplinary because it's reportable, but it's that's there. The ones that we're really working on right now are related to international medical graduates, and so we've got to update the clinical experience license for them because the first cohort of the 4-year group is coming up for expiration in October of this year. So we need to get that reauthorized. We're also removing some of the barriers to that license, so like the step 3 of USMLE, as well as the Washington residency piece. So we're pretty excited about that. I was actually meeting with Representative Julia Reed this morning with stakeholders, and she's excited to go with this. There's 2 other IMG bills out there, international medical graduate bills, and the first one is to put some language in the statute that creates IMG dedicated residency positions that are outside of the match program, and this is in response to a lot of stakeholder feedback. That would create 4-year positions in Washington State with state funding. We're really not totally. It would be nice to get the funding, but we're not completely dependent on it. Really, what we need is that statute language in place, so the National Residency Matching Program will give the state of Washington an exemption to their all-in policy. That's really the key thing there. And then finally, there's what was called the apprenticeship program for IMGs. It's now called the preceptorship program for IMGs because of organized labor feedback. And so that really is using the clinical experience license and going through a structured 4-year period of supervised practice, which results in a board certification and a full license at the end of it. So that one we're pretty excited about. And then the things that we're watching but less excited about, and that's mostly because some of these things are hugely political or hugely complex. The corporate practice of medicine appears to be coming forward with respect to trying to take all of what is actually case law and then making that codified in statute. So that's a big one that other folks are going to have to wrestle with, but we're certainly monitoring it. We don't plan on lodging a position on that particular thing. Obviously, the commission is not wild about non-clinicians making clinical decisions, and so that's always a position that we're going to hold. But with respect to that bill, we're happy to let the stakeholders fight it out. The other ones, as Stephanie noted, are the age-based healthcare conversation. There's a bill that got introduced today trying to raise the age of consent for healthcare for minors from 14 to 17. That probably won't get a hearing, but anytime you talk about the kids and healthcare, that's always contentious. The other ones are psilocybin. I hope I'm saying that right. Looks like the legislature is going to take another run at that. We had a productive meeting with Senator Solomon in the interim, just giving feedback about the things that they want to consider. There really is an effort to try and get licensed practitioners involved, which is kind of the opposite of what Oregon did, where they prohibited licensed practitioners from getting involved. And it's a really complex area because you're talking about something that is not authorized. I think it's classified as Schedule 1 federally, so that means no medical use. And so when you have our licensees who potentially might be prescribing and administering this, it creates a federal problem that we just don't control, and we're not sure what the new administration, how they're going to approach it.
So if anyone watching this webinar or a licensee or a patient sees a bill and has a comment or a correction or even just a question on what this might mean for them, what is the best way for them to get that information, or who should they be contacting for more information?
Well, and I fully agree with Stephanie on this, but I still have to recommend it. The website for the legislature is the best place. Despite and it's probably just it's new and we're learning our way around it. but it is a big learning curve because there's just a lot of information. So for my recommendation, it's the website. Sign up for the email blast. Because of the pandemic, we now can do remote sign-ins. You can do remote testimony. You can get involved that way. But when you go to the bill page of the legislature, and you're looking for a particular bill, you can get nonpartisan staff review and assessment of what the bill does, how much it costs, what the impacts would be, when's it getting a hearing. If it had a hearing, you can click on a link to see what happened during that hearing and who said what. It's an incredibly open resource that we have in Washington. It's not consistent with other states. Other states, while they try and be open, Washington, I think, is far and away a much more user-friendly and more open Senate for that. And if it comes down to you don't like what you see in that particular bill, contact your local representative or senator. They love to hear from their constituents, and they will absolutely take your concerns.
Okay, well, I don't see any questions or follow-up information. So any closing thoughts before we conclude for the day?
I don't think so. We appreciate you giving us the time.
Well, I hope everyone will join me in a virtual round of applause for our wonderful legislative team, Micah and Stephanie. You can find their email on this slide. You'll get emails from me based on this webinar. So feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have additional questions or would like clarification on anything you've heard today. So thank you again for presenting in this valuable information, and thanks everyone for attending. Have a wonderful week, and I hope you take care of yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.